day of camp. So you'll want to make sure that you have day 4's activity guide, and we will follow along with the instructions on there. Also in that activity guide that you have picked up, there were 2 other pages. One that said example code, and then one that said the Scratch 3 interface. So right now I'm going to talk about the Scratch 3 interface because it's changed a little bit. And what I'll do here is go into a new file. This is our main interface page here. This is your project name at the top, so you could title that anything that you'd like. We have the save button that will kind of tell us as it's saving, but we could save right here. And we have along the left-hand side, these are your coding blocks. These coding blocks are all color-coded. You can see that like purple ones are look and pink are sound and motion was blue. We would be using a lot of blues and yellows and oranges. We do use the variable, which is a darker orange. For the most part, we're just going to be in those coding blocks. Now this is where your code sits. Okay, this is where like the script will be for your sprites, and your sprites are your actors. So here's sprite 1, and it's the cat. If you wanted to change your sprite, the name, you could change it here. Okay. You can also add more sprites down here in this icon. You could make your own. We won't get into that. We'll just use the choose a sprite feature. And you can see there's all sorts of stuff. You can search for something up here. And this is kind of like what our environment will look like. This is where the program will run. So this is what the end user would see. This is all your scripts, what this person would be doing or saying or acting out, and then this is what the end result would be. Your backdrop or your stage is over here, and you can see like right now it's a white screen. If I click on that, I can go down here and we could choose a new backdrop, and I'll just pick on one here like this one. There we go. So now we have a new backdrop. Backdrops can also have a script or a set of commands that they follow as well. And we will use that today for this game. So let's go ahead and take a look at the game that we will make today. I'm going to go back to my account. So this is the game that we'll play. It's called Shark Game. And you could hear that there's some sound to it. And I use the arrow buttons to move my shark around. My shark, you can notice, is changing. It's like opening his mouth and closing it. And this fish is floating around, kind of getting close to me. So if I go over to him, the shark eats the fish. So the shark eats the fish, and you could see that the score changed by 10. A new fish popped up out of nowhere, and they're floating around here. And now watch what happens when it bumps into the wall. So when he bumps into the wall, it kind of gets kicked back around and starts going in a different direction. And I know the fish go upside down, but it's just kind of how we can get it to work here. So I'm using the keyboard controls to move my shark around. And every time that the shark eats a fish, we get bubbles. Bubbles, that sound of bubbles. When I get to the last, or when I get to 100, we can get there. Let's see what happens. We get 3 more fish. Now there's nothing that hurts the shark, nothing that takes away points. That might be something that you want to add into the game later on. Here's 100, and there. After it goes over 100, we get a sign that says winner. Let's take a look at what's inside the game that makes it work. So we're going to click on the See Inside. All right, so this is inside that game, that shark game. You can see that I've titled it up here. And I have two sprites. I have Shark 2 and Fish. Okay, I'm going to look at Shark 2, and it's actually, I think, if I click on sprites, if I typed in Shark, you can see it's called Shark 2, and as I hover over it, you can see that it's moving. That's because this shark actually has 3 different costumes. They call them costumes. In the code, we can make it so that this shark seems to move, and that's by changing the costume. Let's take a look at Shark 2's code here. And I tried to take a picture of this, and it's on that example code sheet for you. It's under the blue box that says Shark. And what I have done here is under events, those are the yellow blocks. They are all the event blocks. So it's saying when something happens, then do this. So we have it so when the left arrow is pressed, the direction changes. When the up arrow is pressed, the Y value changes, and so on. You got to think of this area over here as just like in math class when you have graphs and you have X and Y in a coordinate system, kind of like our Mars rover project, that there are coordinates in the X and the Y. And depending upon where you are, can be described in an X and Y coordinate system. So we could see here that every time I press the left arrow, this shark will point in a new direction, which would be minus 90, okay, and that would be backwards. And I just pressed the left button. And it also changes the X by going negative 10 spaces or steps. Now if I push right, it flips back over, it points in the direction of 90, and it changes the X position in a positive value. So we had a negative value and a positive value. If I go and press the up button on the keyboard, we have it so that when the up arrow is pressed, the direction stays 90, and it changes the Y value by 10. So now I can climb up the grid and down the grid by pressing down. And you can see that it's flashing every time I push that button. This, when the green flag is clicked, that's kind of like the start game button. That goes in and it sets a score to 0. This is probably the toughest or most confusing part of the code, is because where does this variable, that's what this is called, come from? If we go to variables, you will see on yours that you don't have this one that's called score, but it's really simple to just make a new one. All you got to do is just click on make a variable, and you could type in something. So I could say points. If I click on OK, now I have a new variable that's available for me to use. And what's kind of cool with Scratch is that anytime that there is a shape, you can match that shape up with any of the code blocks themselves. So this variable score can now be used in these orange blocks and can be manipulated. So right now, on our code for this shark game, you can see that I have it. So when the green flag is clicked, it's going to set, I use this block, drag that over. When it's set, it's going to set the score to 0. And this was a drop down just based upon the variables that I had made. So originally I didn't have points. Points was not there. So it was just score because I typed it in. I could probably get rid of this one maybe by dumping it. Maybe not. Well, so score is the variable, and I'm setting it to 0. Now, using a control block in there, we have a forever loop, and what this is constantly doing is it's going to just go in and in this case here, go and change the costume of the shark, because we're in the shark script right now. So even though we were talking about score up here, it's always visible, but we're in the shark script, and it's just saying forever, just go to the next costume, wait 0.5 seconds, and then loop back around. If you make it really fast, I'll show you. If we change this to, let's say, 0.1, and I click on the green flag, we can see that the shark was moving really fast. Maybe you want to keep it that way. I might even change mine to 0.2. You could do whatever you'd like. I had it 0.5. So this is the script for the shark. Now let's talk about the fish. The fish is probably the hardest to code. This is where we have the control block at the top, where it's just when the green flag is clicked, it's going to play a sound, and you could pick whatever sound that's under the sound tabs here. And then it says show. That's important. It's going to show the fish because we'll later hide the fish. And then forever, let's take a look at what we have going on. It's going to move 10 steps. Okay, so the fish is going to go ahead. We can't see it right now because it's not showing it. If I click on the flag, it'll show it. It's moving 10 steps. Then it's going to turn. So I'm going to click on motion. Here's the turn. And you can see here the turn block normally has a degrees listing. But instead, I have this weird green module that's kind of sitting in there. That's what's kind of cool with Scratch, is that you could add in operators into these fields. So what I had done was went into operators, went to pick random, and I dragged that in, and instead of clicking to the block, I clicked inside of it and let it drop in there. And now I could say, all right, pick a random value of degrees. If I always kept them positive, the fish will always turn in a clockwise direction. And I didn't want that. I kind of wanted it to be completely random. So I have it from negative 30 degrees, which would be counterclockwise, to 30 degrees, which would be clockwise. So it could pick anywhere in this range. You might have it pick an even larger range. Remember that there are 360 degrees in a circle. So you could even just say 0 to 360. I didn't want quite that amount of movement. I wanted my fish to kind of have somewhat of a natural flow. But you could do anything you'd like. So then after it chooses a degree, a random degree, it's going to wait a half a second, and then it's going to look to see if it's on an edge. And if so, it's going to bounce. This is under motion. And you can see that it says if on edge, bounce. Bounce just means it's going to bump off the side of the screen. So when our fish floats over and bumps into one of the sides, it's going to just bump back a little bit. And if so, it'll turn to a new random degree. This next part in the controls, it says that if something, then other things here. So if it's touching the shark, you can see that that is a sensing command. Right now, sensing comes up as touching the mouse pointer, but if I click on the down arrow, you'll see that it gives you a couple of the options that it thinks you'll want. And you can see Shark 2 is there. So I had changed it to Shark 2, and then I plugged it in. Okay. So if it touches the shark, so the fish is moving around, if the shark and the fish touch, then it's going to make a bubble sound. It's going to change the score. It's going to go under my variable, and it's going to change. So that one there, and I changed it to score. And then I changed it by a certain amount of points. So I changed it to 10. I then have it so that the fish hides. It waits 3 seconds, and then it goes to a random place. Now, I use this range here because that range is roughly the size of our standard game screen. Okay, so you could use those same coordinates there, minus 210 to 210 in the X, and then Y was minus 160 to 160. It also goes to a next costume because the fish that I chose has more costumes. So there's like a bunch of fish in there. It makes it look like a new fish popped up. And then you got to make sure that you show it again. So it says show. So that's all sitting in this forever loop, and it's constantly checking. So it's either moving, or then if it touches the shark, then it changes the score by 10. It hides, picks a new random spot to pop back up, changes the costume, and then shows itself again. again. And it keeps checking, checking, checking. Now let's take a look at the backdrop. The backdrop has just a small bit of code. The backdrop is set to, when you hit the green flag, to switch to underwater 1. And that's the backdrop that we see here. You guys can see that on that example code there, that I set it so that if the score is more than 100, then the backdrop changes to a party scene. And it stops everything. If you want to change what this value is, maybe it says if it's more than 90 points, makes more sense, then you could go in there and change it to 90. Maybe you want the points to go up higher, but you could change that to any value you want. So those are the 3 things that have code: the shark, the fish, and the backdrop. And you can always test your code while you're working on it by clicking on the green flag. And you could play it right in this little mini screen here. If you want to try for the full thing, you could click on the little expand button up here, and you'll get to see the entire game on your screen. Well, we hope that you have fun messing around with this. You could change it up any way you want. Maybe you make something happen where the shark loses points. It's up to you. Okay, make it any way that you'd like. Thanks.